Good afternoon, everybody. This is another episode of the Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you. Brought to you, of course, by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Did a show yesterday, and I'm going to spend a couple moments recapping a couple of the topics that we went over yesterday, because I find that there is a little bit of an issue or a little bit of dissension in a couple things that I discussed yesterday. And the unfortunate thing about it is I don't think I heard enough of a backlash. And what I'm interested in doing is creating discussion, but most importantly, just having a good time. Mentioning certain things that could have differing views, letting you, the viewer, the listener, know what mine are, and just kind of going from there. But amongst things we're going to talk about today, I want to do a little bit of Masters preview for this weekend, because I find it fascinating. And I tell you, there's very few championships or tournaments or other things that go on over the course of sports that really are as invigorating as the Masters Golf Championship. And I know a lot of people look at it and they say, well, it's just golf. I can't really be much of a fan of golf. I can't find myself in a big spot watching a major golf tournament. There's something about the Masters that just kind of drags you into it. And obviously you have this year with the reemergence of Tiger Woods, and perhaps for him to be able to play 4 rounds and even be in the mix. Obviously if he is in it to win the championship or comes down to a potential Tiger victory on Sunday, you're going to have record-setting, ratings. But I tell you, the Masters draws in, and I say all 4 of the golf major championships draw in, non-traditional golf fans. The golf fans that aren't watching tournament after tournament every week, the ones that may not golf as a hobby and just may not have as much interest in the sport, but all of a sudden, they follow the majors a little bit, but they get pretty excited for the Masters, and even more so for that than for the U.S. Open. So we will touch on that in a little bit. And I do want to talk a little bit about boxing history. And I spend a lot of time when I'm not doing my show reading, and I find some very interesting things about the history of boxing. And it has been a constant topic on this show because I'm very interested in the state of professional boxing now, particularly the heavyweight division, which I remember growing up as a kid being a very big fan of. And obviously we watched the popularity of the sport diminish, but also the quality of product that we're used to seeing, particularly in the heavyweight division. It kind of just, ran away from us. And I'm hoping to see boxing kind of have its day again. We'll talk about that a little later. But just to recap a couple things that we talked about yesterday. First thing I brought up, and I really do want to know what a lot of people think about this, whether you're watching the show on Periscope or on Facebook Live, or you're listening to the show any way, shape, or form. Always know you could call in. The number is 732-364-3598. Of course, you could also comment on either the Periscope or the Facebook feed. Opening day in baseball. Particularly in New York. And I think Yankees fans today, as they have headed up to Yankee Stadium in a game that, as this program's going on, is still in progress, probably are dealing with some of the things that I deal with every single year when I go to the Mets opening day game. And you know what? This is not a regional thing or not a regional topic. It could apply for the Philadelphia Philly fans. It could apply to Boston Red Sox fans. Why is it that opening day games draw a certain amount of people that aren't as interested in the action? To me, it almost sounds like the inverse of what I would expect to happen. And listen, this wasn't my first opening day. I've been going opening day games for years upon years. And you know what? I've not just seen the New York Mets opening day game. I've seen openers in Atlanta, in Miami, in St. Louis, in Washington, in Cincinnati. And one of the things they all had in common was the exact opposite of what I expected when I go to an opening day game. And it's not from the team standpoint. Whatever team is hosting it does a real good introduction, sometimes brings in some former players. I remember the 2007 St. Louis Cardinals opening day. They brought back, greats from the 64 and 67 World Series championship teams. And then did the same about, with the 1982 team. Stan Musial was there. Some good stuff. But why is it that fans that go to opening day don't seem like they're the diehardest of diehard baseball fans? I would expect opening day, or I would expect stadiums that are having their home opener to be lambasted and jammed with the most diehardest of particular team sports fans. And they're not. So the converse side of that, the other issue that I have, and you hear it a lot in New York, and I'm sure other regions have similar, people that say the same thing. I am a diehard blank fan. I'll tell you this. If you don't make a regular effort to go to your team's opening day in baseball, you are not a diehard fan. I don't care how much you claim to love the team that you root for. I don't care what your excuse is. The bottom line is if baseball is your sport and you are the diehardest of diehard fans of an individual team, you got to find a way to get to opening day. And listen, if you miss it a year here and there, that's one thing. But if you regularly do not go to opening day, and the first thing that comes out of your mouth is I am a diehard Mets fan, or I'm a diehard Yankees fan. No, you're not. You just put your foot in your mouth. So I bet you I'm telling a good amount of baseball fans right now that they're not what you appear to be when you look in the mirror. If you don't make any sort of effort to go to opening day, you are not a diehard fan of that particular team. And I'll move on from this. Talked a little bit about the Twins-Orioles situation. The one thing that I didn't mention about, first of all, the ridiculousness of any Twins player that was upset over Chance Sisco putting down a bunt in the ninth inning down 7-0. In addition to the fact that the Twins were putting a shift on him, which was allowing for the hit. It's almost like a situation. Remember when we were kids and we used to not be able to get enough players to play in a certain game? Let's say we have 5 players or 4 players, enough to have a pitcher, a batter, a catcher, 2 infielders and an outfielder. We'd play the outfielder in a pull area. And you would make a rule that if you hit the ball the opposite way, if you hit a fly ball to right field, you're automatically out. It's almost like that's what baseball wants you to do right now with these sabermetrics people. Not only do they want to implement or have teams implement a shift for every single player. You got a guy hitting 175 with 0 home runs, no power, is just a lousy hitter, and you put a shift on him because the spray chart says that the couple balls that he does hit are to the pull side. It's almost like they're trying to play with a rule that if you hit the ball the other way on the ground, it should be an automatic out. And I tell you, I can't have any more of an issue with the complaining from the Minnesota Twins the other day. I mean, you set your defensive alignment where you leave a whole side of the field open, and you got the nerve to complain about a player that happens to put a ball in that spot as if they should be automatically out because they hit to a place where there's no fielder. Well, you're still fielding 8 fielders, a pitcher and 7 fielders behind them. It's the team's choice to not put anybody on that side of the infield. Like I said, we're going to do a little bit of Masters preview today. We're going to talk a little bit about boxing history. Just to touch on the last topic that I mentioned yesterday. Talked a little bit about the Yankees' 2016 trade deadline. And Brian Cashman, the general manager, obviously gets a lot of credit for what he did there. Trading some star players, perhaps conceding the rest of that season with the hopes that the players that he got in return will be good for the future. Now, the Yankees turned it around within a year. And we tend to automatically feel that one thing had to do with the other. And at this point, based off of the players that are on the field, that couldn't be any further from the truth. We keep talking about Brian Cashman. Oh, what a shrewd set of moves he made at the trading deadline in 2017. I'm sorry, in 2016. Those moves may still turn out to be great. They may turn out to be very good baseball moves, and Gleyber Torres and Clint Frazier and Justice Sheffield and Dylan Tate could turn out to be some of the best players and certainly help the Yankees as they go on their quest to win the next series of World Series championships. Now, I believe that we should say more about it when we actually see it. And I do think that's becoming an issue. Now, I don't think it's going to impact anything that we see this year. I'm not talking about how we have, the Yankees this year, and if the players like a Torres or a Frazier or Justice Sheffield or a Dylan Tate don't have any impact at the major league level, that the Yankees season is going to be a disappointment. I think the Yankees could win without them. But when we are anointing Brian Cashman, the greatest GM and president in the history of professional sports, we tend to be giving him credit for fruits that he has not seen in these deals that he made in 2016. Yes, he drafted Aaron Judge. He signed Gary Sanchez. He signed Luis Severino. So the young players that are making an impact for the New York Yankees right now are because of Brian Cashman. So if you want to give him credit for that, that's fine. You want to give him credit for going out there and making a trade for Giancarlo Stanton, when Stanton essentially, when he knew he was going to be traded, says, hey, you know what, I really only want to go to the Yankees. Kind of made it pretty easy for the Yankees to get in there. That's fine. You want to say that over the course of the last 20 years, he's been a very good general manager? I don't have any issue with that. Here's the issue that I have. He's getting right now credit for something that has not been proven to be a success yet. And you might want to get on me and say, wow, you know what? For a year or a couple months of Aroldis Chapman, and a year and a couple months of Andrew Miller, and a couple months of Carlos Beltran, he got all these young players. My question for you, and I understand some of them aren't ready yet, but where are these players and what type of success are they having with the New York Yankees right now? Because the Yankees, seemed like they had to go out there and make a trade for Brandon Drury, who may turn out to be a very good Yankee. I think it was a very good move to make that trade with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Neil Walker signed as a free agent. I don't have any issue with that, especially 1 year for $5 million. Talking about a guy that made over $17 million last year as a player for the New York Mets and the Milwaukee Brewers. Okay, but where's Gleyber Torres? And I understand that he'll be up. His time is going to come. And, the expectations should be very high for him, especially where he's been ranked as a top prospect in all Major League Baseball over the last couple of years. But once again, you want to call that a good trade? Because the Chicago Cubs won themselves a World Series in 2016 by making that trade for Aroldis Chapman. The Yankees may win a World Series later on. They may win a World Series this year. But the question is going to be, is Gleyber Torres a part of the Yankees winning the World Series championship? And if he is, then Cashman made a good trade. Same thing with Clint Frazier. Now the Yankees have the opportune chance, the shot right now, for several players to step up and take onus of the everyday center field job. And they have a series of players that are hurt right now. Starting with Jacoby Ellsbury, who had a setback. He's probably going to be out for more of an extended period of time. Aaron Hicks, the opening day center fielder, was recently put on the disabled list. Billy McKinney was brought up as the first call when Hicks went down, is on the disabled list. And of course, Clint Frazier, one of the prime prospects brought back in the Andrew Miller trade at the same trading deadline of 2016, is also injured. Now, Frazier has an opportunity, if he could get himself on the mend and on the field, maybe he has a chance to take advantage of his opportunity. And I still remember covering that draft that Frazier was taken in. Very highly regarded player, a guy with a great bat. In fact, I was hearing some discussion over who had the better potential as a power hitter. Clint Frazier or, wait for it, Chris Bryant, who right now is a pretty household name. Not at the time of that draft, though. So, I believe in Clint Frazier. The Yankees obviously made a very good move when they got him in the trade for Andrew Miller. Also getting Justice Sheffield in the same trade. But my question is, when are we going to see Clint Frazier? And obviously, it could start by him being healthy. But it's almost going to be a race for the New York Yankees. Who could get healthy first? And the first person that gets healthy will probably be the one that'll get the first opportunity to be an everyday outfielder in the New York Yankees lineup. And it may not necessarily be center field. Ellsbury, Hicks, they'll be playing center field. I'm sure Clint Frazier could play there if he needed to, but he could also play left field with Brett Gardner playing center. Billy McKinney, when he was up, he's played a little center field in his minor league career, but has mostly been a corner guy. Opportunity exists for these guys. The Yankees at some point are going to need some pitchers. They have a series of very good young pitchers. Chance Adams, Domingo Germán, Sheffield's in the mix. Does he come up and make an impact for the Yankees sooner rather than later? And I guess, this beleaguered point is going to get to this, that the Yankees, I don't think necessarily had to make those trades to get themselves in the position that they are right now. Now, you want to tell me that Torres is going to be vital to the team's success, or Frazier, or Sheffield, or Dylan Tate are going to be vital to the team's success. That's fine. Remember, Chapman was a free agent at the end of the year. The Yankees ended up re-signing him, so he's back in his spot. Miller, if you don't make the trade, you don't have Frazier, you don't have Sheffield, but you still have Andrew Miller, who right now will be in the last year of his contract. Are the Yankees better right now because they made those trades? Now, the easy answer is to say yes, because they got the young players that are still in the minor leagues. And remember, we look at players in the minor leagues like they're the next coming of Jesus Christ. We look at them like they're the next Ted Williams, they're the next Sandy Koufax. We can't wait to see them up in the major leagues. You know why? Because they haven't played in the major leagues yet. They haven't gone through the struggles of the major leagues. You've seen too many players in the major leagues not do a good job, struggle, not get the job done, so you already know that they're not any good. But the guys that are in the minors, we can't wait to tout them as the next great thing. And I'm going to do a show, whether it's towards the end of the week or next week, that I'm going to focus on top prospect bust. And this is going to be my shot that I'm going to take at all these quote-unquote prospect insiders. Now, the ones that have been doing it for a living for a long time, you know what? Good for you. We need some people to actually focus on the minor leagues and give us an idea, based off of our respective teams, who we can expect having an impact on the game in the future. The shots, people I want to take the shots on are these young prospect guys that have just jumped in and think that, as a Yankee fan or as a Met fan, they could dip themselves down into a team's respective system and talk about the next series of players like they're going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And all you have to do is bring up the top prospects in Major League Baseball every year, the top 30 prospects as they exist for each individual team every season. And then you'll find that most of these guys don't have an impact at the Major League level. Most of these guys don't even make it to the Major Leagues. Some of them don't. And some that do have a brief cup of coffee. So how can we sit here in one part of our mouth yap away about this person's eye at the plate, his power, his potential. And then what we do a couple years later, you look at a guy like Jurickson Profar, and I know he might not be the best of examples because he's hurt. He's been hurt for a while. He's dealt with a series of injuries. But how great did we think Jurickson Profar was? How many of these so-called prospect analysts talked about this guy like he was going to be the best thing in baseball history? He was going to be that quote-unquote five-tool player. Remember, Met fans, remember Alex Escobar? You know, this guy you ended up trading to get Roberto Alomar? You know, we tend to go a little crazy when we talk about these players just because we haven't seen them yet. And what we've seen is playing at a different level with competition that is significantly worse than what you're going to see at the major league level. When you're playing in the major leagues, you're playing against the best of the best. When you're playing in the minor leagues, you're playing, in a lot of cases, against somebody on the other side that's never going to get it to the major leagues. When you see somebody master, high A ball, they're going up against pitchers that more than 50% of them are not going to get to the major leagues. In fact, only about 60 or 70% of the pitchers that they're facing are even going to get a chance to go up to the next level to play Double-A baseball. But we're still going to talk about these players like they're the next greatest thing. And I'll tell you right now, the number one reason that people do it, you tend to want to flatter players that you've never seen before. And I'm not talking about never seeing them at the minor league level, because we have the opportunity now, whether we go to local minor league games in little parks in little cities, or we follow minor league baseball on minorleaguebaseball.com and get the results right there for us. We get to see highlights. Sure, as an analyst, you may have a chance to see a certain player play at a certain level. And I think of a guy, let's say, and I'll use a random example. David Vidal was an infielder for the Somerset Patriots. And he played for them a couple of years ago. This was a guy that if you watched him in person, you'd think that he was the natural at the plate in regards to his ability to see the pitch, see different types of pitches, spray the ball to all parts of the field, hit with a little power, run. He seemed to be a legitimate major league prospect. Goes to spring training in 2017 with the Miami Marlins. Not only doesn't make the team, but after a couple weeks in AAA, is cut from the team and he ends up playing in, Somerset and independent baseball again. And listen, I think independent baseball is great because it gives players the opportunity to continue their career if they feel like they've been forced out of Major League Baseball or, professional leagues in the minors. You look at a guy that pitched the other day, and his name right off the bat is escaping me. I'll have to look it up. But he had a pitcher for the Marlins yesterday make his Major League debut. Here was a guy that spent a lot of time in independent baseball. His name was Trevor Richards. And he ends up, coming up there, making the start. Gave up 5 runs in 4 1/3 innings, ended up taking a loss. But here's a guy in 2016 was playing in the Frontier League. After getting a quick chance, in the Marlins organization, they let him go. He built his arm strength back up. They called him back up. He played in a high A ball and Double-A and gets a chance to play in the major leagues. There's another pitcher that pitched for the Reds last year. His name is Tim Adelman. And he was another guy that spent a couple of years playing independent baseball. So independent baseball has a good spot, a good opportunity for, a lot of times you see pitchers succeed from it. And this is a guy that, in 2012, and I'm talking about Tim Adelman, in 2012, 2013, we thought his career was over. He's playing in the Can-Am League, in the American Association. Spends a couple of years working his way back up, gets to the majors with the Reds in 2016. makes 20 starts last year in 2017. Starting, I don't know if he's still in a Reds organization now. I believe he's a free agent as we speak. So there's plenty of examples of minor league players or players that played in the major leagues that go to the minor leagues and build themselves back up. But another beleaguered point that I'm about to make comes down to the fact that when we see players dominate, we can't assume that they're going to dominate at the highest level. And we've seen this a lot with the prospect analysis. When we're talking about Ronald Acuna of the Atlanta Braves or Eloy Jimenez of the Chicago White Sox, are they going to be the next Trout and Harper? Or are they going to be the next Trout and Chris Bryant and Manny Machado? There's a chance they could be. But remember, you looked at guys like Andrew Benintendi and Yohan Moncada, and obviously they're both in the major leagues. They may not have dominated the sport, but they played fairly well. But you had those names kind of pushed to the side when it came to names like Aaron Judge and Cody Bellinger. Now we look at Aaron Judge and Cody Bellinger and we make a statement as if we expected them to be as great as they are. And we've talked about them for the last couple of years as being the best of the best. No, we haven't. Sure, you could rank, a Bellinger in the top 10 in regards to prospects prior to the 2017 season. Was he ranked 1 or 2? He wasn't Moncada. He wasn't Benintendi. But obviously in his first season, he has come out ahead of both Moncada and Benintendi. And that's what you ask. How many times do you see prospects, and sometimes not even related to injuries, end up underperforming, and nobody wants to speak up and say, yes, I thought this guy was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And all of a sudden, as we hit the halfway point here at the Passball Show, once again, John Pielli with you. The number, if you're interested, 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about the upcoming Masters. And like I said, when it comes to golf majors, we're seeing a little bit of a renaissance from the non-traditional golf fan that has gone and supported the sport. And we don't see, perhaps it could be because of some demise of some of the other sports. Perhaps some of the other sports exist out there today, and fans may say, I don't want to follow that all the time. Let me find something to generate a little interest, something that may interest me a tad bit. And golf majors, if you follow the ratings, have certainly been up over the last 5+ years. And you look at a tournament like the Masters, which is coming this Thursday, there is a lot of intrigue in it. The intrigue obviously starts with the possibility of Tiger Woods potentially competing in this. This is a guy that's won the Masters 4 times in his career. And I understand it's been a while since he won his last one. 13 years to be exact since he last won it in 2005. But if you followed him at the Valspar Championships, in the Bay Hill Invitational the next week, you know that this is a guy who, however polarizing you want to describe him as, brings people out in droves to want to see how he's doing. And when he's doing well, there's a lot of people that are intrigued enough to want to watch it on TV, to want to get down to the individual tournament and see it in person. And I'll tell you this, if Tiger Woods somehow is on the top part of that leaderboard on Sunday on Masters, I can't imagine few sports fans doing anything else but following that entire round. And I promise you that Sunday, if Tiger Woods is in the mix in the last round, you're going to see a whole new group of sports fans that have never watched the golf major before turning on the Masters to see how Tiger Woods did. Now, I was looking today at the list of the players that will be competing, and obviously the field will dwindle by about a half, somewhere around a half, after Friday's round, the second round, and the bar will be set, and the players that have a score that's less than a number will be cut or won't make the cut. And I was looking at some past winners and some favorites. You look at odds. I think Jordan Spieth is right towards the top. Bubba Watson, two-time winner, is up amongst the top. Tiger Woods has good odds just because he's Tiger Woods. And I was looking at a couple players that haven't won yet, in Justin Thomas and Dustin Johnson. And we look at players that have played well on the PGA for a while and haven't won that major. And we've seen many times that a player kind of has his coming out party on the big stage. So my first possibility is either a Justin Thomas or a Dustin Johnson winning the tournament in a kind of a coming out party type of fashion. Now look at Spieth. Look at Rory McIlroy. A couple of the younger players, the youth that is looking with the hopes to transcend the sport. Tiger Woods being out of action for so long, golf has been looking for a new face. A younger player to kind of take that next step, take the game by its horns, and become its next star. Well, I think you'd look at a Spieth or a McIlroy, and if they happen to win this tournament, I think they'd be well on their way. Adam Scott is an interesting case, the 2013 winner. I think he's a guy that when comes down to a major, has a lot of experience being in the mix when it comes to the final round. Bubba Watson, of course, the two-time winner. And then I look at some older players, some players that have been around for a long time, and we probably haven't heard their names in a long time. In fact, a handful of these players that I'm about to mention are probably only playing in the Masters because they've won one before. And one of the great things about winning the Masters is if you do that, you have a lifetime invitation to play in the tournament as long as you want. If you've won it before, if you're a past winner, you're always invited back. And that decision's up to you. You can decide that you don't want to play, but you're invited every single year. So the first player I want to talk about is Angel Cabrera. And I remember his 2009 victory at the Masters. Ian Woosnam, who according to CBSSports.com is out of the 87 players has the least amount of chance to win the tournament. Now, he has won the Masters. He did win it in 1991. Larry Mize won the tournament in 1987. He'll be competing. And how cool would it be to see a player like a Larry Mize or an Ian Woosnam? Names that have been completely forgotten about in the whole history of the sport. To see a player like that win a tournament like this. And a guy that I've always rooted for, I found myself as a big fan of back in the day. And that's Fred Couples. I know he's been out of the spotlight for a while. He's almost 60 years old. He certainly is not the player that he was 20 years ago. But I tell you, it would be pretty cool. I know there's a lot of people that are rooting for Phil. But as this tournament starts on Thursday, I tell you, I think a lot more people will be glued to the television to watch this. Moving on, once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you, talking a little Masters, which obviously will start this Thursday. Probably the most intriguing of the major golf tournaments that exist in this country in the PGA Tour. 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. You can also comment if you wish on the Facebook Live feed or the Periscope feed. I will try, as long as it's within reason, to redirect the conversation to anything that is on your mind. I wanted to talk about the sport of boxing. And I spend a lot of time, studying things that interest me. And Obviously, you know that first and foremost, I'm a baseball historian. Spent a lot of time reading about certain baseball events and times just to be versed enough to talk about it. But I admit, and I stand up to say that outside of baseball, one of my biggest passions when I was a kid was the sport of professional boxing. I grew up at a time in the late 80s and the early part of the 90s where you may not have considered it, the heavyweight division in boxing's glory time. It may not have been its best era of boxing. But I tell you, it was pretty fun to watch. Anybody that, looks at Mike Tyson for his career and says, hey, what could have been or what it was, and judges it for what it is, has to be able to go back to the time of Mike Tyson's prime and try to compare it to any other boxer that came up through the ranks and anybody that was anywhere near as dominant as Mike Tyson was in his prime. And I'm not saying for the amount of wins that he had early on in his career, and I'm not saying for having the opportunity to beat some of the best, which he, unfortunately didn't get enough tests because of the level of competition that existed in boxing at that time. So, Mike Tyson, which may not have been his fault, dominated the sport for a period of time better than anybody else that had either preceded him or came after him. I got a chance to watch that firsthand. And because of that, I grew up being a pretty big boxing fan, particularly in the heavyweight division. Of course, as time goes on, you start to see the likes of the Evander Holyfields and the comeback of George Foreman, which I thought was really fascinating. Because the more that I read and learned about George Foreman, the more it impressed me that George Foreman was on the top of the sport almost 20 years before in the 1970s. Later on, watching the last very big-time heavyweight champion that we've had in this sport, in Lennox Lewis, and he defended the championship well in a time where corruption was running rampant. He seemed to be the one saving grace that you could root for. Now he retires. You got the Klitschko brothers. Obviously, the one Klitschko ends up holding the heavyweight championship for a long time, but nobody cares because the corruption that exists in the sport and the fact that, Don King and his likes did everything they could to drive the diehard boxing fans out of the sport and got them interested in MMA and UFC, watching a whole different type of fighting, and even the WWE ends up picking up some new fans because of the destruction of boxing that's happening right before us. But I'll tell you, there really wasn't a better time in the history of the sport than the 1960s and the 1970s. And I think if you go back to the great Muhammad Ali, remember I talked about Tyson before and say, hey, what could have been? If he was smarter and ends up not making a decision to rape that woman and end up having to serve time in prison, could he have been one of the greatest the sports I've ever seen? Same thing applies to Muhammad Ali, but I'll defend him and say that there was nothing that he did wrong. Muhammad Ali was essentially given the name of a slave. He ends up converting his religion to the Muslim faith. He has a new name, Muhammad Ali, gets drafted for Vietnam and is standing on a line. And if the U.S. military didn't want to ostracize him the way they end up doing, they would have given him the opportunity to say, as Muhammad Ali, call him by his name, Muhammad Ali. Are you ready to join the U.S. Army? And if that happened and he refused, then he has to deal with the consequences. But I think part of the reason that Muhammad Ali refused to enlist in the Army and refused to listen to his name being called is because he felt it as disrespect that the United States military did not recognize him by his chosen name. So if Ali does not have to serve time in prison and get exiled, he still comes back when he faces Joe Frazier with an undefeated record. How many more fights could he have won? And you're also talking about a time where this guy was going up against the best of the best. He fought Sonny Liston for the title. He fought the likes of Floyd Patterson. The majority of the boxers at that time were not bums. This is a guy that took on the best of the best and dominated at a time where you could say there were a lot of really good fighters in that time. Not just in the 60s, but the 70s. Yeah, you got Frazier. You got Ken Norton, who beat Ali, of course. You got George Foreman. Yeah, later on, you have the great Larry Holmes, who wins all those fights to start his career. Once again, he's kind of in the same mold of a Tyson, just because of the competition level. And similar to Tyson, that's not Larry Holmes' fault. I do say you could be a little critical about the choice of some of Larry Holmes' opponents, but it's not like there were the best of the best at that time that were barking or standing by in line at the door waiting for that next opportunity to fight for the heavyweight championship. Yes, Larry Holmes fought a couple of bums along the way. A couple guys that didn't belong in a ring with him whatsoever. But he also fought at a time where those next big-time boxers, those next big-time champions, there weren't too many of them. And he did eventually take the fights that he was supposed to take, including a controversial one that he took early on against Muhammad Ali. You know, Muhammad Ali was way past his prime, probably needed to fight for money because he was broke, and ends up taking a pretty good beating from Larry Holmes. When Muhammad Ali, as great of a fighter as he was, and the shot is that he may have been one of the greatest heavyweights that ever existed in the boxing division, he didn't belong in the ring with Larry Holmes. But I tell you, going back, and if you follow boxing in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, kind of makes you miss the excitement of the sport as it existed then compared to the way it is now. Yeah, you saw a fight a couple of weeks ago with Luis Ortiz. The possibility they could get boxing kind of trending back in the right direction, but now it's got a lot of competition. You got MMA, you got UFC. You got even the WWE, who is recruiting, former MMA fighters. And that thing is supposed to be probably about 50% fake. But it's stealing a lot or taking away a lot of the diehard boxing fans. Once again, John Pielli, Passball Show. As always, happy to be with you. The number, if you're interested in calling in, is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. I'm not going to give any scores as the show's going on. And I've said all along, I'm interested in doing YouTube Live, but I'm not going to do it in front of 18 subscribers. So if there's anybody that's listening right now that's interested in my program, subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if I get past a certain amount of subscribers that I feel is worthy enough to do a show, like I said, if I have X amount of subscribers, I know a certain amount of them aren't going to be on when I do a live show anyway. So I'm wasting my time more than I am right now. But, looking at a couple things going on in the world of sports, Dennis Rodman goes out there, and I did mention LeVar Ball yesterday on my show. And it's sad that, anytime you have an athlete that's father is getting more attention than they are, that can't possibly be a good sign. And, Lonzo Ball probably has a good chance of having a good NBA career. He was drafted, obviously, I think second overall in the draft by the Los Angeles Lakers. Lakers look to be better probably even next year. They're going to improve. So his brother, LiAngelo Ball, is playing in Lithuania now, of course, was involved in that situation where he's playing overseas for the University of UCLA, of California, Los Angeles. Ends up being involved with a couple other players that are shoplifting, ends up leaving the team. His father says, hey, go to Lithuania and play. You're going to get ready for the NBA draft. So Dennis Rodman, we haven't heard a lot from Dennis Rodman lately. Last time we heard him talk, he was praising the dictator of North Korea. So I can't necessarily say that this is a guy whose credibility is right at the top and where it needs to be. But he goes out there and says, listen, I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, had a chance to watch him play. He's not good at all. He's awful. He's just awful. And I probably don't believe that 100%, but I also don't completely doubt it. Remember, LiAngelo Ball, the second of the three Ball sons, with obviously Father LeVar, who's the quote-unquote entrepreneur, but really is a loudmouth. He's an attention whore that will do anything he can, including throwing his own children under the bus, to make a name for himself. Nobody knew who he was before his son became a potential NBA draft pick. So obviously he's created an issue with his oldest son that's in the NBA. Players don't like Lonzo because they don't like his father. As far as opportunity, if things don't work out with the Lakers, other teams may take into account the overbearingness of his father when it comes to employ his son down the road. And it's certainly going to impact the possibility of a team having interest in LiAngelo, who's currently, like I said, playing in Lithuania. And I think, looking back at this, playing in Lithuania could have possibly been a good thing. And I'm not saying the competition there is great. And Dennis Rodman in his comments makes sure he understands that the competition level in Lithuania is not very good. And you can have a staged 72-point game, which a lot of people believe that, essentially passing the ball to LiAngelo, Ball, obviously no pun intended, and allowing him to score all over the place was kind of staged to make his numbers look better than they really were. And if that's the case, all that anybody that was part of that is doing is setting a man up for failure and a failed shot at the NBA. Now, I believe right off the bat, you got the couple rounds of the draft that are set up. I believe it's, 3 rounds? And if I'm wrong, I know somebody will correct me. But after that, you have a series of players that sign contracts to play in the G League to potentially compete for a spot on the back of the roster when the season starts. And you wonder where a guy like LiAngelo Ball will go. Because of his namesake, because of his brother, and hopefully not because of his father. Has he put himself in a position to be drafted? And if so, what team feels like this is a player that's worth taking on a draft pick? Because I'll tell you this, if I'm one of the other teams, I'm banking on a team to be willing to waste a draft pick on LiAngelo Ball. And I'll make sure that I study, my back of the bracket NCAA teams, my mid-majors, and my teams that, break it down to the players that you could come in a draft knowing a little list about. And I make sure I find some intriguing players. And know that if LiAngelo Ball is drafted by a team before me, that's giving me one more opportunity to draft a player, either in the second or the third round, that can help my team going forward. And I'm not necessarily against LiAngelo Ball getting a shot. But if the thought process behind it is that he deserves a shot because of his father, then I have a problem with that. Is he getting a shot because of him and his brother and his father's presence on social media and talk shows? Then I don't think that would be fair. Can he earn a spot by playing good basketball in Lithuania? To show some skills, maybe some speed, some quickness, some ability to play defense, a shot? You know what? If he has some of those talents, then I think a team should consider him. But I'll tell you, if there's a team in the NBA that drafts this guy at all, then you get the sense that he's being drafted because of his namesake and because of his father. Forgot to spend a couple minutes talking about Villanova. Great win yesterday, beating the University of Michigan for the national championship in college basketball. Congratulations to them and Jay Wright. Second championship in the last 3 years. I worry about the city of Philadelphia. Hopefully they don't have a similar reaction as they did when the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. I understand Villanova is kind of, in the suburbs. Not necessarily in the middle of the city. But, hopefully the fans out there will be nice. Enjoy the championship. Certainly well-deserved. Great coach and a great program. Tonight, you got your regular line of baseball games coming up. Devils Rangers, if you're interested. Devils creeping closer and closer to clinching that last playoff spot. So hopefully you get a chance, if you're a hockey fan. And hey, Rangers who don't seem to be going to the playoffs this year, but have a bright future. Those teams, when they play each other, the Devils and the Rangers, always seem to bring out the best in each other. And there's no doubt about that. So, when all things have failed, you get the opportunity to watch a little Devils Rangers. Obviously, you got the slate of baseball games on tonight. And I always recommend, if you're a big-time sports fan like myself, get into the documentaries. Get into the 30 for 30s. The East 60s. All the different things about sporting events of the past that have impacted the future and the present. You can watch, older movies about some players and sports and things that happened in sports that you probably didn't even know before. Don't just leave it for the nerds like myself. Be back with you tomorrow. Quick recap on what we talked about today. Kind of a little, you got Twins-Orioles. Twins putting a shift on, the other team bunting. Good. As long as you're putting a shift out there on every left-hand batter, I hope everybody bunts against it and gets a hit. If you're going to cry about that, shame on you. We'll see tonight with Gabe Kapler and the Philadelphia Phillies, how long he keeps his starting pitcher in the game. How many pitchers will we see tonight? And, of course, the Masters. I'm going to put my money on Jordan Spieth this year. We'll see how it works out. Be back with you tomorrow, 6 to 7 p.m., right here on Periscope, Facebook Live, and on demand on YouTube. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.